This podcast was produced using artificial intelligence and refined by human editors.
Welcome, Voyagers. You're tuned in to Travel with Lara and Luca, and boy, do we have a show for you today. Grab your virtual passports because we're heading to
Beautiful Lisbon, the city that spans 7 hills and is soaked in sunshine, history, and the sounds of Fado music drifting through its old cobblestone streets.
And as always, I'm your affectionate nomad Luca, charmed by the gustatory delights of every street corner.
And I'm Lara, your navigator through time, architecture, and the secret corners that only the locals whisper about.
Speaking of whispers, Lara, did you ever hear the one about the ancient sea monster that supposedly guards the Tower of Belém?
Only in the tall tales you so love, Luca. But we'll dive, not too deep, mind you, into the iconic sights of Lisbon in our next segment.
And for our listeners, expect a journey replete with the vibrant sights, the mouth-watering bites, and the vivid nightlife, stitched together with our pearls of personal experiences and musings.
Because that's the spice we bring to Travel with Lara and Luca, a mix of historical facts with our own often humorous and poetic hot takes on each and every topic.
Now, let's set the scene. Imagine the sun dappling through the terracotta roofs, a breeze carrying the scent of the sea, and grilled sardines from the old town.
And don't forget the Pastel de Nata, those custard tarts dusted with cinnamon. They're the real deal, and I may have had my fair share. For research purposes only, of course.
Strictly for research. And speaking of research, we've done loads so that we can present to you the must-sees, the hidden gems, and even some weird and wonderful facts about Lisbon.
We'll also dive into its tumultuous history, how it rose from the ashes of a devastating earthquake to become the charismatic capital we adore today.
And because we care deeply about your travel experiences, we'll chuck in expert travel tips.
Yes, from how to navigate the trams to sipping coffee like a local at a pastelaria.
Oh, you're getting me all nostalgic, Lara. Can you believe it's been a decade since we first set foot on those Lisbon cobbled lanes?
Time flies when you're having fun, or in our case, when you're falling head over heels for a city's charm. Do you remember that first time we tried to speak Portuguese?
I was so confident with my phrasebook until I realized I was declaring my undying love to the bus driver instead of asking for a ticket to the castle.
Unforgettable, indeed. And for all of you out there dreaming of your own unforgettable Lisbon moments, rest assured, we've got you covered.
That's right. In addition to savoring the local cuisine, we'll share the less beaten paths that offer an escape from the tourist trails and into the soul of the city.
Stick around for that because you'll find out about Luca's mysterious handshake with a legendary local artist in one of those paths.
Now, that's a tale. But enough teasing, let's get this virtual expedition started. We'll lift the curtain on Lisbon's iconic sights, with stories so vivid you'll feel the Atlantic breeze on your cheek.
Ever watched the sunset from the top of a tower that's withstood the tests of time and the elements?
Or wandered through a monastery where history is etched into every stone and solemn statue?
Lara and I have, and we can't wait to tell you all about it.
So, stay with us, because after a short delve into Lisbon's most prized landmarks, we'll whisk you away on a culinary journey that will have your taste buds dancing the traditional vira.
Ah yes, the vira. Always ends with me getting tangled, but it's worth every step.
It surely is. All right then, let's venture forth into Lisbon's iconic sites, where each monument tells a story, and we have a library's worth.
And after, get ready for the deliciously addictive world of Portuguese cuisine that we'll savor in segment 2. But for now, Luca, welcome to Lisbon.
And we're rolling into our favorite part of the show, iconic sites. Today, we're talking about the crown jewels of Lisbon. First up, the tower that's not just for Rapunzel, Belém Tower.
Oh, Belém Tower, where you half expect a knight to saunter out, right? Erected on the northern bank of the Tagus, this fortified tower has stood watch since the early 16th century. But what's the deal with it, Luca?
Well, Lara, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It served as a point of embarkation and disembarkation for Portuguese explorers, and it's got stories.
You're talking about the carvings, Luca, the rhinoceros? It's hilarious to imagine the stone carvers going, "You want me to carve what?"
Yes, It was the first sculpture of a rhinoceros in Western European art, and the poor fellow reportedly ended up in a shipwreck. Oh, if those tower walls could talk.
They'd chat about the monks who used to light lamps to guide the sailors home. Quite the welcoming sight if you think about it.
Moving along the river a bit, let's wander over to the Grand Geronimos Monastery. Tell me, Lara, do you remember taking that guided tour?
How could I forget? I got totally lost in the cloisters. Our group went one way and I got distracted by this incredible stone knotwork.
Ah, the Manueline architecture. It's like they handed the stone over to oceanic forces and out came maritime motifs.
And let's not forget, Vasco da Gama's buried there. When our guide casually dropped that, I almost face-planted on his tombstone.
That would have been a historical oopsie-daisy. Let's not desecrate any explorers today, please.
I'll do my best. But Luca, if you're feeling grandiose, there's no place like Praça do Comércio, right?
Right you are. Imagine living in the 18th century, stepping out of the royal palace, gazing over the square, down to the water, where the ships trade in riches from the New World.
I'd strut around with one of those feathery hats waving at my subjects. Good day, peasants.
Easy there, Queen Lara. One has to admire the grand U-shaped design. It's like Lisbon is opening its arms to the world.
Speaking of things that lift you up, the Santa Justa lift. Your story kills me every time. Tell the listeners.
Picture this. A beautiful day. I'm in the lift enjoying the architecture, and then I feel this tap on my shoulder.
The ghost of Carmo Convent?
I wish it was a pickpocket. But joke's on him. All he got was a mint in my grocery list. Sorry, buddy, no treasures here.
What a steal. But really, you take that neo-Gothic elevator and find yourself with a view worth any minor theft.
It's an urban charm you don't see anywhere else. A reminder of Lisbon's innovative spirit back in the day.
Luca, tell me, after visiting these sites, how do you think they shape Lisbon's narrative?
I feel like they are the chapters of an epic tribute to Lisbon's golden age. They each tell a story of discovery, of wealth, of ingenuity, don't you think?
I do. They're the markers that let you plot the course of Lisbon's history, each with a voice that echoes through time.
I can hear it now, calling to us, singing tales of seafarers and explorers ready to set sail on another adventure.
Exactly. And speaking of adventures, we're going to guide you on a culinary journey in our next segment, Delicious Cuisine. Have you ever tried to bake your own pastéis de nata?
Let's save that story for after the break. And we're rolling into one of my absolute favorite topics when uncovering the layers of a new city, the cuisine. And Lisbon, oh Lisbon, your palate for the palate does not disappoint.
Indeed, you can't say you've experienced Lisbon without diving fork first into its culinary sea. Let's start with a classic, the pastéis de nata, Portugal's treasured custard tart.
Ah, the pastéis de nata, a bite-sized glimpse into heaven. Or so I thought, until I saw you trying to make them at home, Lara.
Hey, culinary artistry is not my calling, but at least I tried. Seriously though, the real deal in Lisbon? Crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside, hint of cinnamon, and I dare say, plenty of love. What else could you ask for?
You must swing by Belém. It's a rite of passage to stand in line for those legendary tarts where monks created them centuries ago. Walk out with a dozen, and they'll never see the light of the next day.
1 dozen for me and 1 tart for you. Sounds about right.
Moving on from the sweet to the savory, let's tackle the backbone of Portuguese cuisine, bacalhau, or salted cod.
The joke is there are 365 ways to prepare bacalhau in Portugal, 1 for every day of the year. But Luca, you've got to tell the folks about your love-hate relationship with this fishy friend.
Well, it's complicated. I admire how a simple fish became a staple, traveling from the cold Atlantic waters into Portuguese hearts. I mean, bacalhau à brás, with its lovely mix of onions, potatoes, and egg? Fantastic. But can we just admit that dried and salted fish looks a bit menacing?
Ha! It's not what it looks like, it's what it turns into. Also, the wine that goes with it surely eases everything, right?
Oh, the wine. Portuguese wines are vastly underrated, and that must be rectified immediately. Whether it's the crisp and vibrant Vinho Verde or the rich and complex reds from the Douro Valley, there's a wine for every dish and every soul.
Food market enthusiasts rejoice. Forget touristy overpriced restaurants. For a true taste of Lisbon, head to one of the local food markets. Time Out Market, for instance, it's like a culinary cabaret, don't you think?
Oh, it's a symphony where the chefs are maestros, and every bite is a note in an edible opus. The sheer diversity from traditional fare to gourmet pizzazz, it's where locals and travelers break bread and barriers.
But Luca, we almost forgot to mention the beloved petisco culture. Do tell our listeners about these tasty little wonders.
They're small plates, Portuguese-style tapas if you wish. From torresmos, scrumptious fried pork belly, to savory azeitonas or marinated olives, petiscos are tiny ambassadors of flavor, inviting you to stay, chat, and sip a little longer.
Speaking of chatting, I feel a spontaneous ode to Lisbon cuisine bubbling up from your poetic soul, am I right?
How could I resist? Oh, Lisbon, your tastes bring a tear to those who savor and those who cheer. From codfish dreams to nighttime sip, every morsel a delectable trip.
Bravo, Luca, bravo. You certainly have a taste for words as well. Listeners, I promise he didn't plan that.
Poetry and food. It's all about feeding the soul, after all. But let's leave some room for our upcoming smorgasbord, shall we? We're taking a turn down the cobblestone alleys to discover Lisbon's hidden gems.
So, hidden gems in Lisbon, those special spots that are off the beaten path, where we've stumbled upon some of the city's best-kept secrets.
Absolutely. And I have to start with the LX Factory. Remember the first time we found that place?
Oh, I do. It's like stepping into an artistic wonderland. The LX Factory used to be a manufacturing complex, but now is this vibrant cultural hub with unique shops and cozy eateries.
Yes, and that one bookstore tucked away among the art studios. What was it?
Leur Devagar. You can find the most eclectic collection of books there, and that flying bicycle installation. I mean, it gives the place an otherworldly vibe.
Now, speaking of unique experiences, we can't overlook the local Fado houses.
Ah, Fado, the soul music of Portugal. Remember that night in an Alfama backstreet Fado bar? The raw emotion that filled the room.
How could I forget? The singer's voice clinging to every heartstring, wine in hand, the dim lights. It's like you can feel the history in every note.
Truly. It's one thing to hear Fado on a recording, it's another to experience it live, where you can practically touch the nostalgia and longing in the air.
It's not just music, it's pure emotion, a story told in a language you can feel, even if you don't speak a word of Portuguese.
Now for an elevated experience, let's take our listeners to the Miradouros, where the views can rival any well-known vista in Lisbon.
Ah, the Miradouros. These terraces offer panoramic views of the city that are simply breathtaking, especially at sunset.
Remember Miradouro de Senhora do Monte? That might just be one of the best views over the city. A perfect vantage point for both the castle and the river.
Oh, and when we went to Miradouro de Santa Catarina, we became friends with that group of graffiti artists. What a night.
Yes, and graffiti brings us to the vibrant street art scene of Lisbon. It's like the city is a canvas, and every street corner tells a different story.
Lisbon's street art, it's something else. The colorful murals by famous artists like Vils, they add such character to the city's walls.
And how about that giant mural of the woman by the harbor, the Infante by Shepherd Ferry? That one caught us off guard with its sheer size and beauty.
Now, if we're talking about hidden gems, there's that tiny coffee shop we found. I swore to keep it to myself, but, well, our listeners deserve to know.
Oh, Luca, you're giving away our secret Lisbon hangout. The coffee there is, well, we'll let our brave travelers discover its magic on their own.
They can thank us later. But a true hidden gem doesn't always have to be a place. Sometimes it's the stories, the little-known facts, the whispers of the past that make a city like Lisbon come alive.
That's beautifully put, and it really captures the essence of exploring Lisbon, seeking out the magic woven into the fabric of the city.
So, as we wrap up this segment on Lisbon's hidden gems, let's remind our dear listeners to look beyond the guidebook. The real treasures are found in the alleys, the back streets, and the corners not often tread.
And speaking of treasures, next up we have must-see places, because even though we love the hidden spots, there are some places in Lisbon you simply cannot miss.
Indeed, these are the landmarks and locales that define Lisbon, the ones that take your breath away just thinking about them.
Stay with us as we guide you through the must-see places that make Lisbon the captivating city we know and love.
Welcome back, everyone. You're still here with us, crashing through the waves of history and threading Lisbon's cobblestones. This is Travel with Lara and Luca, and now we delve into the must-see places of Lisbon.
And Luca, when we say must-see, we're talking about places that practically reach out and grab you by the senses, right?
Absolutely, Lara. It's that overwhelming tug at your soul, like when you first set eyes on the Castelo de São Jorge. Towering above the cityscape, it's got a tail at every battlement.
Oh, the castle! Every narrow, winding path in Alfama seems to ascend there like all roads lead to the throne, or, in this case, a commanding view that begs contemplation, wouldn't you say?
You hit the nail, Lara, and it's a myth factory, this place. If walls could talk, we'd have enough stories to fill a library and then some.
I can almost hear them whispering of Moorish kings and Christian conquests. And let us not forget the castle's gardens, where peacocks strut with pride as if they own the place.
Speaking of ownership, let's stroll down through Alfama, shall we? The district itself is a living, breathing must-see. I'm often lost in contemplation of the tightly knit houses, dripping with clotheslines and the melody of life.
Then you stumble upon a vista unexpected as an impromptu love song sung from balconies, and suddenly you're rooted to the spot. It's the true heart of the city, as authentic as it gets.
Can't talk about authenticity without mentioning Mosteiro dos Jerónimos, Lara. If the monastery was a book, its stories would extend the length of the Tagus, bless every ship from the age of discoveries.
You're right. They say if stone could speak, the statues and figures would recount endless adventures. Every nautical twist in its architecture evoking the sea's capricious nature. And let's not even start on the cloisters. Enough beauty to make a grown man weep, Luca.
What can I say? Whether it's the cloisters or the custard, from Jerónimos, we are led to sweet, delightful confectionery of Belém. We can't ignore that Mosteiro's legacy extends to our taste buds too.
Very sweet of you to loop back to our past segment, Luca. Now shall we wander over to Praça do Comércio? It's not just a square, but a gateway between Lisbon's historic past and its vibrant present.
Oh, the stories it could tell us. Named after the commerce that flowed through it in days of old, aquarella painted yellow framing the Tagus. It's been said that the pulse of Lisbon's heart echoes along its arcades.
A heartbeat of rendezvous and revelry. I remember sipping coffee there, feeling like a character in a centuries-old novel. Drenched in sunlight, the square holds the stage for meeting locals and statues, like King Jose I, quite literally pedestalized.
Do you recall the snapshot story we promised earlier, Lara?
Of course, we can't end this without sharing. There's this photograph we took of the sun casting shadows upon the water. It was the blue hour, or was it golden? Either way, it captured Lisbon, ephemeral, reflective.
And glorious. That moment when day turns to night, the city transforms, does it not? Light dances on the river's surface, the old stone seems to whisper, hold your breath for just a moment and watch the magic unfold.
Speaking of magic unfolding, our listeners will find it tough to fold away the memories we've unpacked today. And speaking of unpacking, tune in for the next wave of discovery as we delve into some odd and intriguing facts about Lisbon.
That's right. From centuries-old bookstores that make you feel like you've time traveled, to traditions that'll raise your eyebrows, and quite possibly, your luck in love.
So stay tuned as we unfold the mysteries of the weird, the wonderful, and the wait, what of our favorite city. Trust us, it's going to be a ride you won't. That's coming up on Travel with Lara and Luca. Welcome back to our journey through Lisbon. And Luca, do you know what segment it's time for?
Oh, Lara, it's my absolute favorite, Weird Facts. Lisbon isn't just about stunning views and amazing food. It has its quirks too.
Perfectly put, Luca. And let's kick things off with a love story of sorts, or well, a tradition that deals with love, the San Antonio Church.
Ah yes, Saint Anthony of Padua, the patron saint of lost things, and apparently love. So Lara, do you know what some singles do when they desperately want to get married?
They go to the San Antonio Church and pray to the saint. But it gets weirder. Some even write down their wishes and place them under the statue of Saint Anthony, hoping for celestial matchmaking.
And some even cook up small bread loaves, known as Saint Anthony's bread, to improve their chances. Gotta love the combination of baking and matchmaking. It's very Lisbon.
From love to literature, let's talk about Bertrand. It's a bookstore so old, Luca, it's been around since 1732. It's seen more history than most of the city.
I mean, this bookstore survived the big earthquake in 1755, and it still stands, filled to the brim with books. Think of the stories those walls could tell.
While it's not weird to love books, having a bookstore that's almost 300 years old and still up and running, that's a delightful oddity in today's digital world.
Speaking of surviving earthquakes, let's move on to the Carmo Convent, or more like what remains of it.
Luca, wouldn't it be just right to do this one in a spooky voice? The convent is kind of eerie and haunting with the roofless nave and arches open to the sky.
Oh, Lara, it's the stuff of Gothic novels. The day the earth shook and the sky fell in 1755, the Carmo Convent was left in ruins, a ghostly skeleton of its former glory. And to this day, it stands as a reminder, a monument to resilience and maybe even a few lingering spirits.
Ooh, chills, Luca. But from above ground to below, let's talk about Lisbon's underground Roman galleries, a weird part of the city that most never even see.
Yes, these mysterious corridors beneath the city's streets are only open a couple of days a year, and they say they were created by the Romans.
It's like stepping back in time, wandering through these ancient paths, so little understood, but right underneath our modern strolls along Rua da Prata.
Now let's do a quick fire round, Lara. Throw at me some of the weirdest facts about Lisbon that you've got, and I'll rate them on a scale of 1 to you've gotta be kidding me.
All right, challenge accepted. First one, Lisbon is older than Rome, around 4 centuries older, to be a bit more precise.
What? That's definitely a you've gotta be kidding me. Next,
Lisbon is known as the City of 7 Hills, but there are actually 8 hills.
now you're just showing off, Lara. That's a solid no way.
And did you know there's a trash museum, Museu do Lixo, which displays decades of waste from the city? Talk about historical rubbish.
Historical rubbish. That's my new favorite phrase, and that's surprisingly cool in terms of weird facts.
Here's one more, Luca. Lisbon's Vasco da Gama Bridge is the longest bridge in Europe, a massive 17 kilometers long.
Oslo to Lisbon, you've got competition. Considering how much we love to chat, we could probably start at one end and only finish our conversation by the time we got to the other.
We could, and speaking of long things, next up we're diving deep into Lisbon's rich history.
Oh, the tales we'll tell. From the age of discoveries to revolutions and resilience, Lisbon's past is as vibrant as its present.
History buffs and story lovers, stay tuned as we explore the legends, the triumphs, and maybe even the heartbreaks of this incredible city.
So stay with us on Travel with Lara and Luca, and get ready to step back in time with us. History buffs and casual time travelers, unite. Today in our history segment, we're diving deep into Lisbon's past.
Yes, starting with one day that shook the world, quite literally, the Great Earthquake of 1755.
Ah, that tragic All Saints' Day. Can you imagine, Lara? Thousands attending Mass, candles lit up everywhere, and then the ground trembles.
The stories say the ground shook for 3.5 minutes. A nightmare on an otherwise serene morning.
The aftermath was a lesson in resilience, wasn't it? The Marquis of Pombal, tasked with the rebuilding,
ordering the infamous bury the dead and feed the living, he reshaped the city into the grid-like downtown we walk today.
Such a fascinating figure, Pombal. Ruthless, yet modern, his policies back then lay the foundation for the Lisbon we love.
He'd need more than just those policies if he had to deal with the traffic today. Moving on to a brighter chapter, the Age of Discoveries.
Ah yes, when the little Tagus riverside town became the center of the world, Vasco da Gama setting sail from Belém.
And the epic tales that followed. Lara, I imagine being there as they prepare the ships, the entire town abuzz with anticipation.
The same excitement flows in me, pairing perfectly with my mystified disbelief of their bravery. Tiny ships, vast oceans.
Now, from epic explorations to profound shifts back home. The Revolution of the Carnations, it's such a poetic name for a military coup.
Poetry in motion, perhaps. Flowers tucked into gun barrels, not a single shot fired. April 25th, 1974, a day branded by peace.
My family tells me stories. One of my uncles was a young soldier then. He'd never seen anything like it. soldiers and civilians in jubilation as they ushered in democracy.
How personal history intertwines with the grand narratives, it's mesmerizing. Speaking of personal stories, Lisbon's Jewish heritage is vastly significant.
Indeed, they contributed greatly to Lisbon's development, especially during the Age of Discoveries.
Yet they faced harrowing times, especially in the 1500s, with the forced conversions and the establishment of the Inquisition.
Now, let's take a quirky historical tangent. If you could time travel, Luca, which Lisbon epoch would be your first stop?
Oh, that's tough. I'd probably zip back to watch the construction of Jeronimo's Monastery. The Manueline architecture in progress must have been a sight.
I, on the other hand, would sneak into one of those strategy meetings during the Age of Discoveries. Imagine the world maps, the plans.
And what a language barrier that would be. Coming up next are expert travel tips and a little Portuguese language lesson to avoid such historical faux pas.
You won't want to miss Luca's attempts at the Lisbon lingo. We'll help you ensure you don't order a plate of postage stamps instead of those delicious pastries.
Stick around, fellow wanderers, for travel tips coming up.
And we've journeyed through Lisbon's weird and wonderful facts. Now, let's pivot towards something every traveler needs: expert travel tips. Whether you're a first-timer or a seasoned jet-setter, buckle up because we're about to smooth out the edges of your Lisbon travel plans.
Ah, travel tips, the bread and butter of wandering wisely. Let's kick things off with getting around the city. Public transport in Lisbon can be a bit of a wild ride, can't it, Lara?
Absolutely. Remember that time we tried to guess the bus routes without checking the map first?
Mistake number one. I think we ended up making an unscheduled tour of the outskirts before realizing our folly.
Yep, I recall a tour through places I never knew existed. But lesson learned, always check the bus and tram routes ahead of time, folks.
And don't forget about buying a Viva Viagem card. It's like a magic key to all public transport, and it saves you from fumbling with change every time you ride.
True. And while we're on the topic of saving, let's chat about money-saving tricks. When it comes to museums and cultural sites, what's our golden rule?
Timing. Many museums have free admission on certain days or times. For instance, slipping into the Berardo Collection Museum is free on Saturdays.
Exactly. And let's not overlook the joys of street life. Walking around Lisbon's vibrant neighborhoods doesn't cost a dime yet offers priceless experiences.
Now that's my kind of frugality. Also, dining slightly off the beaten path can be lighter on the wallet. Tourist hotspots often hike up the prices.
So wander a few streets away from the main plazas for authentic and more affordable culinary delights. Now, debating the seasons is a favorite pastime of ours. When would you say is the best time to visit our beloved city?
For me, it's the shoulder seasons, spring and fall. The weather's still delightful, and the lines to the elevadores, let's just say, a bit shorter.
Interesting choice, but I'm a summer beach session girl. Sure, it's busier, but the festivals and sardine barbecues are in full swing.
Can't argue with sardine season, but those autumn hues over Lisbon have stolen my heart. Listeners, don't let our debate influence you. Lisbon is charming year-round.
Agreed. And knowing a word or two in Portuguese holds the key to unlocking even warmer interactions.
The basics go a long way. Even saying obrigado or obrigada for thank you can light up someone's face.
And let's not forget the almighty desculpa, meaning sorry. Especially useful when you almost crash into a local while getting lost in the Alfama alleyways.
Been there. But my absolute favorite has to be pastelaria, the gateway word to delicious pastries and baked goods. What's your go-to phrase?
Well, given my superb ability to butcher the pronunciation, it's definitely fala inglés, a polite ask for English, which most often is met with a gracious nod.
They do appreciate the effort, though, so don't be shy with your Portuguese. It adds to the adventure.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this trove of tips, let's gift our listeners with some gracious guidance that goes beyond the usual advice.
If you want to catch the sunset, do it from a miraduro. These lookout points offer the best vistas and less crowding than the typical spots.
And don't rule out a little night stroll. Lisbon lights up elegantly in the evening, and it's a whole different vibe after dark. Romantic and mysterious.
Couldn't agree more. But honestly, no matter what travel tips we share, the essence of Lisbon is in its unexpected moments. So plan, but leave room for spontaneity.
I can't improve on that, Luca. And speaking of spontaneity, next up we'll take you beyond Lisbon's cityscape for some unforgettable side excursions. Ever wanted to see fairy tale palaces or surf Atlantic waves?
We'll reveal all that and more. But first, let's take a moment of wonder as we say goodbye to this segment and
ready your travel spirit for what lies ahead.
So, for this next part of our journey, we won't be staying within the bustling streets of Lisbon. Instead, let's indulge in a bit of wanderlust and talk about the incredible side excursions you can embark on from the city.
Oh, you just said my favorite word, wanderlust. There's so much more to see beyond Lisbon itself, and you could say these excursions are day trips into fairy tale lands.
Couldn't agree more. Starting off with Sintra, a magical little town that I swear must be populated by wizards and elves at night.
Absolutely, and during the day, by tourists. You cannot go to Lisbon and not visit Sintra. The Pena Palace with its vibrant colors looks like it leaped right out of a storybook.
Pena Palace is pretty much what happens when you give a romanticist architect free rein. And let's not forget the gardens. They're like an enchanted forest. Each turn unravels another secret.
Don't get me started on Quinta da Regalera. That place is seriously incredible. Remember the initiation wells? Spiraling deep into the earth? Bruno, it's like descending into another world.
Did you just call me Bruno? It's Luca. Thanks very much. Though I'll let it slide because those wells are truly out of this world. And the Masonic symbolism, it's like Indiana Jones meets National Treasure.
Sorry, Luca, my Indiana Jones. And talking about adventure, let's talk about surfing in Cascais. The beaches there are stunning.
Cascais is cool, laid back, truly a surfer's paradise. Although when I tried to surf there, I spent more time underwater than on the board itself.
I've seen jellyfish with better balance, but you were persistent, I'll give you that.
Persistence or sheer stubbornness, you decide. But for our listeners who prefer staying dry, the town of Cascais is a beauty. It has this old-world charm with a touch of luxury.
From pastel-colored buildings to the lighthouse and the marina, it's the perfect place to walk around and breathe in that ocean air.
It's a great escape from the city. But speaking of escapes, Lara, tell our listeners about Évora and the Chapel of Bones.
Oh, Évora is a treasure trove of history. It's part of the Alentejo region. The Chapel of Bones, or Capella dos Ossos, is, well, as macabre as it sounds. It's a small interior entirely lined with human skulls and bones.
A chilling reminder of our mortality. It's pretty much saying, hey, you're enjoying this trip? Remember, you're gonna die someday.
Thanks for that, Luca. Yet it's not just about the bones. The town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Roman temple, Gothic cathedral, they've got the works.
No bones about it. And while we're still on the bones theme, let's talk Arabida. Zero bones, but plenty of brawn, if we're talking landscapes.
That's quite the segue. But true, the Arabida National Park is a lush green jewel hugged by the most mesmerizing strip of azure water.
Mountains meet the ocean. It's serene, peaceful, and a far cry from the city's vivacity. I remember just sitting there, watching the sunset and thinking, life cannot get better than this.
Until you get hungry, then life can definitely get better. But before that moment, yes, it's pure magic. It's an area that often gets overlooked by tourists, which is a crying shame.
I'm with you on that. And for those looking for one last escapade before heading back to the city,
that has to be the beach town of Costa da Caparica, across the 25th of April Bridge. It's famous for its extensive beach that stretches further than the eye can see.
Plus, you get amazing views of Lisbon from across the river. Snap a few pictures. It's the city from a perspective not many take the time to appreciate.
All these places are just a short trip away from the city, each offering their unique slice of Portuguese culture, beauty, and history.
This is what makes Lisbon so perfect. You have this vibrant city life, but within an hour or so in any direction, you have beaches, history,
bones,
and memories for a lifetime. Speaking of, isn't memory making a huge part of traveling?
Spot on, Luca. Speaking of which, in our next segment, we'll wrap up with some final reflections on Lisbon. We'll talk about the memories we've created, what the city's left with us, and, well, we might get just a tad sentimental.
Can't wait for that. You might even hear Lara get teary-eyed.
Or Luca getting poetic. You'll have to stay tuned to find out. And just like the last rays of a Lisbon sunset, we're winding down to the end of today's episode. It's been an absolute delight to explore and reminisce about this incredible city with you all.
A true trip down memory lane and cobblestone lanes and pastel-colored lanes. Ah, Lisbon, you never cease to amaze.
I think my favorite part was reliving the weird facts. I mean, a bookstore that survived more than 2 centuries and an earthquake, only in Lisbon.
Oh, agreed. But what about that moment you tried to outdo the Fado singer at the local Casa de Fado? Your dedication to authenticity knows no bounds, Lara.
Haha, well, one does try. Let's just say I'll stick to podcasting. What about you, Luca? What's been your highlight from today's Lisbon Lowdown?
I'd have to say the history segment had me. Chatting about the significance of the revolution of the Carnations really got to me. The peaceful power of people coming together.
And it's in these small yet profound facets of Lisbon that you find its heart, isn't it? Not just in the historic events, but in the everyday, in every street corner conversation, every tram ride, every sunset from a Miradouro.
And speaking of heart, we love hearing from our listeners. It's your stories, your tips, and your love for travel that fuel our adventures here on Travel with Lara and Luca. So tell us, have you been to Lisbon? Which parts of the city stole your heart? Do you have a hidden gem that you're willing to share? Or maybe a bit of advice for a first-timer?
Don't be shy. Reach out on our social channels, drop us an email, or leave a comment right where you're listening to this podcast. We might just feature your story in our upcoming episodes.
But before we fully bid adieu, we mustn't forget the traditional end-of-show poem. Let's see. Under Iberian skies so fine lies a city where the Tagus meets the brine, where every moment's steeped in wine, and echoes carry both song and dine.
Luca, it's like you've got a direct line to the soul of the city. Every time it gets me, the way you weave words together. Poetic and perfect.
Ah, I try. But it's the spirit of Lisbon that writes the stanzas. I'm merely its humble scribe.
And with that beautiful ode, it's time for us to say goodbye. But not for long. Remember, new journeys await as our podcast continues to voyage across the diverse tapestry of this world.
Speaking of which, next time, pack your warmest coat and sturdiest boots because we're heading to a land famed for its dramatic cliffs, heartwarming folk music, and a certain dark stout enjoyed across the globe.
Ireland, get ready for myths, legends, and, with any luck, a little bit of magic.
So stay tuned and remember to keep exploring, keep laughing, and keep sharing those travel stories. They bring us all a little closer, no matter where in the world we are.
Until next time, folks, here's to travel, stories, and friendship. This is Lara.
And this is Luca signing off. Happy travels, everyone.